So, welcome, Lawrence, the Energy Master. I'm really excited to have you here as my guest. And this is a Tantra Tokyo Love Hawaii production. And this has been over a year, maybe 2 years, that I met you at first in Los Angeles when I used to live there.
That's right.
But mainly the topic of today is like just bringing you back as. Sorry. I'm just going to wait every time that happens, maybe, because there's just really no way to. I live on a loud street, so sorry. I'm just going to pause if that happens.
Sure. What I didn't actually hear it. What happened?
Oh, you didn't hear it? Okay. That's good, because, yeah, you won't hear it. So, okay, that's good to know. Because I have, like, where I live in Eva Beach, loud cars with big bass is a big thing here.
Oh, yeah. Well, your microphone is very focused.
Yeah,
So,
so I think that's not an issue. Okay, good to know.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so last year we were at the Extraordinary Facilitators Training on the Big Island, and all the Tantra
Yeah.
teachers were meeting. And I had just moved back to the U.S. from Japan, so it was, it makes sense that I wasn't really ready to be ready, because I was
Mm-hmm.
really resettling into my old self
Yeah.
after spending 3 years of not being myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I have all of my notes from last year. And, what you had said was my interpretation of what you had said was every problem in your life is due to hidden shame.
That's pretty good. Mm-hmm. That's
And
pretty
then at the
accurate.
time, I was like, what am I ashamed of? I'm out as bisexual. I have herpes. I tell people I've been sexually assaulted. I'm a speaker for, being a sex worker, being a prostitute, being, what am I ashamed of? I'm not ashamed of anything, right? Um, and then in the last year, I understood that I was raised by narcissists,
Mm.
and I was attracting narcissists in my relationship, and I didn't know why. And because I was so ashamed of that, I would just kind of like move on from it, right? I was
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, I attract abusers, but I'm ashamed of that. So I'm just going to keep on hoping that the next person is going to be better. And then
Right.
boom, like abuse just comes at me from all directions. It is really an interesting thing that happens. And what was happening is like my vibration is a prey vibration, where prey, Prey, where predators can, on a very primal level, sense that I'm wounded. And that's what I discovered through my complex post traumatic stress disorder, that as abused children, we actually radiate that abuse until we face it and heal it. So I'll let you comment on shame and anything that resonates with you, if anything.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate us being here and taking the time. I think these are very important discussions. And the reason I feel like it's so important to look at hidden shame is because so much of that is coming from things inside of us that have happened physically, emotionally, psychologically, that keep us from really feeling our power. So when trauma in general, any kind of trauma happens, it creates this psychological environment. And when we're children, those coping skills make sense for the trauma we're experiencing. Right? So, whatever the thing is, and all of us have, that's the crazy part about life. I mean, there's nobody who gets it right in terms of parenting. And if your parents don't do the trauma to you, then the school will. And if the school doesn't, then the streets will. If the streets don't, then the other thing. There is always going to be a place for predators who have their own shame to find ways to get access to people who have no protection. That's where it starts. And so because that is what it is, it just is the world we live in, then all of us, one way or another, have some areas of shame, guilt, blame, especially hidden shame. Shame about what we have. Like you said, there's all these, you gave this list right in the beginning. I'm open about this, and this. Those aren't hidden, but then the things that are hidden, which everybody has, those things sit in there and sit in us. So you start with some trauma, which is brought on by somebody who has trauma. So traumatized people do the traumatizing in general. Yeah. And that just goes. So now you show up in life and you're like, oh my God, you know, all people who look like this or dress like this or think like this are potentially dangerous. And so that becomes a truth. So now you leave that place where you were, you leave your household, your high school, your whatever that thing is, and you move out into the world. But the trauma still looks out into the world and says, dangerous, 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 dangerous. And so that is the signal that lets, using your metaphor there, or your, not metaphor, but real sort of example, there's a signal that we give that then lets people know that we're prey, because there's an alertness, right? Somebody who is not prey is just hanging out. They're just like, I'm good, right? There's no thing, because they know they can handle it. But if those mechanisms of protection have been dismantled, which typically they are with somebody who has longer term access to your body or your mind, then, you know, actual dangerous person walks up and we don't respond. And that's really what perpetuates it. So, or you respond in such a way that they know that they can get away with it. You're not going to talk, you're not going to defend yourself, you're not going to run away, you know, whatever the thing is. And having dealt with childhood trauma and dealing with it every day, I had a circumstance come up yesterday. Man, I was just in my trauma for like probably 4 or 5 hours, like real intense childhood trauma. You know, so when people are like, oh, I thought I healed that, I'm like, you know, if you've had early childhood trauma, which I have,
that's really interesting to hear you say that, because I think that the shame of people who've been traumatized, especially early childhood, nobody wants to admit that, right? I'm an angry baby for 4 hours, or I'm a, you know, I'm frozen and I can't move. I spent most of October basically in zombie state and smoking marijuana from morning till night. And just I wasn't even able to do yoga, or it was hard to walk 5 minutes to the beach. I was in the greatest freeze of, it was really hard. October 2020 is the month that my brain broke open, pretty much.
Yeah,
but I
beautiful.
think, yeah, the shame, like nobody wants to admit that they were abused as a child. That's not as fun as admitting. That's not. So what I just came up with this statement, like coming out as bisexual was a lot funner than coming out as a child abuse victim.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
no parades, there's no drugs, there's no house music when you come out as a child abuse victim. Can you talk about being a victim? How do you feel about that word?
I mean, it's a word. You know, some people that feels very real for them. It's not, it really doesn't, I mean, genuinely saying this, like, it doesn't really matter kind of how I feel about it. It's more how an individual is telling the story of their life, right? So if you've had early childhood abuse, it is very likely that you have a story about being a victim, or, as I was doing a session with somebody today, being at fault for the abuse that happened to you. And both of those become hidden shames. So, you know, the victim idea is, it makes sense because in fact you are, you know, you are being taken advantage of, you are being quote unquote victimized. But what holds the story is, it's not necessarily what happens, but the story we tell ourselves, and not consciously but unconsciously, about what happened. Because when trauma happens, so I had early childhood sexual abuse. That was the thing. And the narrative, my one parent just had total denial, like, oh, that just didn't happen. My other parent misunderstood what was happening and took it as like some sort of power struggle. And the person who was doing the abusing had their, like, you know, forward facing, I'm a good Christian thing. And then and they were using that to hide behind what was actually going on. So there were all these very complicated dynamics. So how does a 4-year-old make sense of that? You have to tell, I mean, well, anybody after trauma will tell a story about it, right? Because think about this. I'm standing here, boom, the earth starts shaking, you know, some big earthquake. That will, to my body, feel like a trauma. So the first thing I'm going to do is go like, what's happening? Make a decision, get to safety, and then be like, okay, how did that happen? What happened here? And assess the situation, you know, and then you start telling the story. You start having to make sense of this. So, you know, I was in a big earthquake in 1994 in LA. So as I just ran through that, my brain remembered, went straight there as soon as I mentioned it. And I immediately came from that frame, and I'm looking around the room at all of the dangerous things around me if in fact an earthquake of that magnitude hit again. Because everything...
You just did a scan of the room just now?
When I told you that story.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I realized like there's all these things that could maim and or kill me, none of which I had within the first 5 years of the earthquake. There were no dangerous things around anywhere. But now it's been a long time, so there's dangerous things everywhere. And that's how trauma should kind of go. It should kind of move further and further into the background. And then, you know, it's available. So when there's an earthquake, we've had a couple, you know, I can assess very quickly how dangerous is this actually. And most of the time, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not even going to move. Just be like, okay. Because I know I've been through it. And so that.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Like a one event though. And I'm not sure if your abuse was over a continuum.
Oh, it was over decades.
Yeah, so then that is complex PTSD, which is different than one event, acute PTSD.
Well, right. Yeah. The point being, though, the event happens and then you start telling the story. Does that make sense? That's really where I'm going. So I came up with all these things. Oh my God, you know, paintings on walls are dangerous. This thing and this thing and this thing. And that was my reality. But that slipped into the background because earthquakes are so rare and random. However, for complex PTSD, as you're saying, we're looking for the thread that tells the story. And very often that can be, I was a victim, that could be a frame, or it was my fault, or any of those other things. And the problem with those stories is they determine the way we're actually seeing the world. And this is the issue with trauma in general. It's like yesterday's trauma went literally, that I was telling you about, that was triggering my early childhood abuse. And it was at that level. It was completely debilitating for like 4 hours. but my recovery time in the past, that might have gone on for 3 months. I might have been dissociated for 3 months from that core trigger, which is, basically somebody threatened my well-being yesterday physically. And that goes straight back to childhood trauma. And I was just like, wow. But, I have some routines and practices, and there are people I can rely on who've been through it, and I can call up and say, hey, I'm really in like a
emotional trigger.
Yeah.
Emotional flashback. Sorry. It's called an
Yeah.
emotional flashback.
And
you're right. The emotional flashbacks can last years even.
Yeah. So I'm more interested in like shortening the recovery time. So the trauma work I do with people now is just more like, instead of having this like, oh, I'm going to be over it, or it doesn't affect me, or it shouldn't affect me. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I will almost guarantee you, if we did a brain scan of my brain, you would see developmental trauma in my brain because of the level of abuse that was happening at such an early age.
Oh my God.
Like,
I'm curious to look at my brain because yeah. So last year you said, as if a dog has a bone, and I'm not going to do it because I'm wearing lipstick, but like you can imagine a dog like, right. And then you're like, just drop the bone, right? When are you going to drop the bone? And that was funny and that was good. But then what do you do when you don't even know that you have a bone?
most people don't.
Like,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have been able to tell me that I was ashamed of anything last year. That's why it didn't really resonate,
Right.
So I didn't know I had a bone. The bone was actually in the back of my head. and everybody else could see it, but I couldn't.
Right.
How do you drop the bone if you don't know you have it?
Well, you just said it right there. The secret answer is what you just said, which is everybody else could see it. So who are your trusted people who can tell you things about yourself that you may not actually want to hear? That's how you can start to get some awareness around the bone.
Yeah, I think it's so hard. It's complex, right? So, because friends could be like, you might want to look at that, or, a coach might say that, but it's like,
who do I trust?
yeah,
Right? I have a very small list of trusting people, of people that I trust. To be like, hey, dude, I think you should pay attention to that. But when those people speak, I'm listening. And then if enough random people say the same thing, then I'll be like, oh, I need to pay attention to that. Right? Whereas,
you go to therapy, Lawrence?
I have done a lot of therapy early on. There did come a point where I realized I was light years, the experience level and the session level and all that stuff, I was functioning light years away, way beyond any therapist I could find. And they were like, I would like come in being in like, advanced schooling, a master's degree, and they'd be like, well, let's go back to kindergarten. So after a while, I stopped doing that. But at this point, my therapists are, people who I trust. And that could be friends, lovers, people who I can be myself with everybody, but there are people that love who I am. And those are the people that I would tend to trust, about, with some feedback or work things out or share from. But I'm not looking for anybody to heal me. But I think doing your work is very important. And like I've been very public about this, public, like I'm not that public, but I'm saying like I have been open about this public, like I'm a, yes.
Not your main platform.
Right. And but I have been very open. I'm not an influencer.
There was a time when that was my main platform. I was performing as a sexual assault survivor advocate. I was really into being because it was not cool, but it's more socially acceptable to say that you've survived adult trauma than it is, I think, to say that you've survived childhood trauma.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, people freak out when you talk about childhood trauma. It hits home. it hits home. It hits home because it's like people don't want to believe that people can be so fucked up and cruel to little kids. It's horrifying. It's like the same way people get upset if animals are getting tortured, you know, but like children getting tortured, which my particular abuser was, that's hard to deal with, but I can deal with it, man, because I've seen it firsthand. You know, so these aren't theoretical things for me. These are experiences I've had. And, you know, with the level of complex trauma that I've been through, I just find myself in a lot of ways way more capable. People tell me stuff all the time in sessions and coaching sessions that I do for other people. I'm always like, seriously, like that's all you got? like really? Like that's it? Somebody told me the greatest thing. It was so funny. It was like we were in, I can't really, obviously I can't tell details or anything, but I will give you a metaphor. They were saying something like, yeah, you know, so I've always had this desire to like have sex with a bunch of elephants and then roll around in elephant pee and do that with a wig on and a dress, you know. And I was like, okay, whatever. Welcome to, you know, like we're people. We do all kinds of crazy shit. So nothing like I'm rarely surprised about how dark people will go or how, you know, how delusional people will get in terms of love and light. Both sides are pretty hilarious equally.
That kind of brings up, do you identify as codependent by chance?
No.
No. Or
Mm-mm.
anything in that spectrum, codependent narcissism.
You know, they just piss. I mean, I think we are creating a lot of narcissists. So I encounter a lot of narcissism. Most narcissists, in my experience, I'm dealing with one right now, they have no idea. You know, I think all humans, in order to be a human, you have to be somewhat narcissistic. In other words, all your perceptions are entering through you. Your brain doesn't exist over there. Your eyeballs don't exist over there. So there is a central point of perception through which all senses flow. And so there is a quality of narcissism, i.e., I'm not using it in a clinical sense. I'm saying there is a quality of physical, actual data experience that gives you the sense that you're the center of your universe, which you are. But you are not the center of the universe. And that's the difference. Right?
Yeah, there's healthy narcissism and toxic.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a
And probably
balance.
a huge spectrum in between. But
Yeah.
right. But fundamentally, like, it is obvious to me that there are other people who have other perceptions about reality. And all I have to do is look up into the sky and go like, yeah, I'm not that important. But when you're narcissistic, you really don't understand that. It genuinely seems like everything, like you are the center of everything. So it's an interesting thing. It's fascinating. I'm dealing with one right now. They're really, really, really challenging to speak to somebody who thinks they have the answer to everything. So
Or they are not willing to, they don't hear you.
yeah, literally. Yeah.
They're listening to you to plan their rebuttal before you finish a sentence.
Exactly.
They're not listening to you.
Oh my God, it's hilarious.
So I started identifying as a codependent because it's helpful for me to have that framework,
Cool.
to oppose, to understand how I was raised by narcissists. And because I didn't have that framework before, I didn't see the abuse. So I think that labels and names are good for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
I am identifying as a survivor already of child trauma, but you know, it was like my resistance to being a victim ever. I'm not a victim. I'm not a victim. Right. But then if you look on my back, it's fucking like gangrene and fucking, it says victim on the back. I've been lashed as a slave a million times for 44 years, you know? and I wasn't trying to, like, I was just kind of, you know how like heroin addicts, they have abscesses and their arms about to fall off and they're like, it's fine, I'll just keep
That's right.
putting a needle in there. And that was basically what was happening to my life. So I think that labels are good and bad. You know, you don't want to attach to a label, but I think for me, these labels were necessary. And
Mhm.
I'm, you know, looking into codependent anonymous meetings and just getting support from that right now
Beautiful.
because I've
Mhm.
never done that before. I resisted it because I'm like, I don't hang out with drug addicts or alcoholics anymore. I don't, you know, I'm not even in a relationship, you know? So, and I resist all these toxic relationships. I'm not lonely. I'm not having, you know, sex instead of love. And so it baffled me, you know? And then when I started to look at that spectrum of narcissist, codependent, and how they're paired and how they have the dysfunctional relationship, then it became clear to me that is why I'm attracting abusers, because I
Mm.
need to wake up and notice this is actually a vibration that all codependents vibrate. And this is a vibration that narcissists, regardless of their race, their generation,
Mm. Yeah.
you know, that pattern is generational, ancestral in my family.
Mhm.
At my aunt's funeral in Japan, I was picked on by my mom's bully. And she
Mm.
called me
Wow.
a selfish foreigner at the funeral. Like, she picked on me because I look soft and weak and emotional, right? She knew that it would impact me emotionally. So she said I was a selfish foreigner for being at the funeral, which is crazy, you know? um, but she saw my mother in me and just targeted me. So it's generational. It's not even your actual story. Does
Mhm.
that sound true to you?
Yeah, I mean it's a, you know, like you said, they're frameworks. You want to be careful to choose frameworks that are empowering in general.
Yeah, it's even hard. It's hard to be like, I'm a codependent. I'm a recovering codependent. That doesn't sound very empowering ever. So I never wanted to say that stuff. You know, I don't like.
Yeah.
I resisted being a drug addict, even though I smoke weed every day. Um, oh no, this is gonna. I see. So it's a 40-minute one. Okay. So crap. How can we do this? Yeah, I thought that was gonna happen. So we've got 10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes. We can do it.
Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is
Yeah.
you said sex work as a doorway to wholeness. So let's talk about sex work as a doorway to wholeness.
Well, yeah, I mean that in a number of different ways, right? So there's the sex worker who is offering the service of sex, and or, you know, the way I look at it energetically is like offering the service of the transformation and fun of sex and openness and freedom and possibility, and the ability to, especially in the realms that I think about these things, like the ability to metabolize guilt and shame as a sex worker, where somebody can bring all that stuff and you have the capability of, you know, I think of it like a flame or incinerator, where it doesn't matter what the garbage is. And so I see that as very holy work. And I do, you know, I do hope we legalize that in the country at some point, because it would do a great service. It would give people who are really screwed up in their shame and their desires a place to, with a professional, to move through those things. Um,
Do you call what you're doing sex work or?
yeah, I mean, it's it's definitely. I mean, I'm sure other people looking at it would be like 100%. Because it's the work of transformation without the arbitrary social boundaries of like, this is okay and that's not okay. So what I mean by that, that's complicated. Let me see if I can say that in a more clear way. um, we already are filled with sexual shame. So what I do as a sex worker is to create an environment where somebody can be themselves and reveal even the most shameful parts of themselves in a safe space. And that's a very important role.
So that sounds
Um,
like conscious sex work to me, which is pretty much what I am doing. But
yeah,
I would
yeah.
say the majority of sex workers are traumatized people, you know,
Hmm.
that are living out their wounds through this exchange. And then the clients who, so unconscious worker, unconscious client, unconscious worker, unconscious client.
Yeah.
And that's like probably 90% of sex work.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but I would argue that that's 90% of cultural sex.
Right. That's true.
So
Okay. Thank you.
I'm not
Thank
going
you.
to make
Thank
a
you. Thank you.
morality around that because that's what
Yeah,
people are
thank you.
doing.
That's good because I'm really like kind of honing down how I talk about this. But we used to talk about in the sex worker movement, they would always kind of compare it to, oh, well, normal jobs are like this. Okay, well, sex is like this, not just sex work. 7-Eleven workers don't like all their clients. So who's going to like all their clients? So we had all of the media, talking points. And that was one of them. That when you say sex work is this, you say, well, all work is this. When you say sex is this, okay, all sex is this. And you're right. That's true. Thank you for.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of the challenge we're dealing with as a society, which is why I bring it up, because like kids are looking into porn and they think that a penis touches a vagina or a butthole and orgasms shoot through the body because that's what happens on a cisgen porn, just heteronormative porn. Um, but it's just it's absurd, but they don't know that. Nobody, there is no place to really get a chance to speak safely about sex. So then, you have humans looking at porn, using that as the model, not dealing with their shame, not having a safe space to talk about it, not knowing how to communicate their desires, not only knowing how to manage their fears, not knowing how to manage their traumas, not knowing how to communicate about their traumas, not knowing how to communicate about, right? We just go on and on and on. So therefore, a majority of sex on the planet happens, quote unquote, unconsciously, sometimes literally and sometimes figuratively, but so much of it is driven by drugs and alcohol and some kind of numbing and weed and anything else, because we don't have the skills and we don't teach the skills. So there's nothing on you. There's nothing going on in sex work that's any different from going on, except in regular world, except that people are not getting paid for the shitty sex that they're putting up with.
And that's why I chose to be a sex worker for so long.
There you go.
My worth was translated through the money that men were giving me because I was basically abandoned by my father. So I needed to work out my worthiness with men.
Mm-hmm.
At first, it was very toxic, and I was arguing and fighting with a lot of my clients. I got robbed and sexually assaulted a bunch of times, and it was hard.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I acknowledged my internal source, my eternal beloved, my spirituality, that things started to change for me.
Mm.
But that wasn't enough. Tantra wasn't enough. I needed to find out in therapy my story
For
of
sure.
childhood
For sure.
because the spiritual bypassing is big in the Tantra community.
Oh my God, it's so big. Drives me crazy.
Meditate it out, right? But meditating it out doesn't make it go away, actually.
No. Mm-hmm.
um, so we have about 3 minutes left. We may be able to expand if they don't cut us off. If they cut us off, um, let's just then they cut us off. But what is like how do you think that people discover their hidden shame? What are some techniques or tactics that one can
Well,
do to discover their hidden shame?
look in the places that you're afraid to look. What are you afraid of? What do you like? Go towards the fear, go towards the gunfire. So if I were to say to you, you know, what is it that you're ashamed of? Literally, what is it that you don't like about your body? Or what is a desire you have that you hope nobody ever finds out? Like, those are the places to go. And then start with just having that discussion with yourself. Because if you can't have it with yourself, you will not have it with somebody else ever. So it's way better to have that, start that discussion and realize no matter what your desire is, if it is physically possible, then it is normal. And then when it comes to your mind, if it's possible to think about, then it is normal, because we're sexual creatures on a planet of 8 billion people who all got here through sex.
You mean
So
if it's physically possible to have sex with a bunch of elephants, then it's normal?
it's normal, of course.
But
And
it's probably not physically possible to have sex with a bunch of elephants, I don't think.
it probably isn't, but it is normal if that's your desire to think about that and want to do it.
It's normal to you, you mean?
No, it's right to the person who's I mean, to think about anything that is not possible that you want to do, it's normal because we do that all the time. You know, I'd love to have sex on Mars. Probably not going to happen in my lifetime, but it is completely normal to think about how cool that would be. You know, and that's my point. It's like, this is private space. And there are so many people that are ashamed of the thoughts that they're having and the desires that they have, some of which may or may not ever even be physically possible. But to have desires that aren't physically possible is pretty normal.
I think it's going to go over. If it does cut us off, it says less than a minute, but it's been saying that for a long time. I don't have, this is my first webinar through my website.
Nice.
And so because of my trauma, it's like, I launching things, launching webinars, launching anything, even stupid videos on YouTube. I put a lot into this, you know, and I'm like, you know, just this little webinar conversation, you know, it took like hours and hours of work and promotion
Sure.
and all that stuff, right? And then if only my good friend Bruce is down there listening, then it's like, so I feel shame about that I'm not popular, that I keep trying so hard, and that, you know,